What if you could actually listen in on a debate that happened over a century ago? A debate between two giants of psychiatry, a teacher and his student whose argument literally split the entire field in two. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to unpack that epic clash between the brain and the mind and see how modern science is finally starting to heal that deep wound in our understanding of mental illness. So at the heart of this whole story is this fundamental conflict. On one side, you've got the teacher, Theodore Meynert. He was a top neurologist who insisted that mental illness was a physical thing, a disease of the forebrain. He wanted hard, measurable scientific evidence. And on the other side, his star student, Sigmund Freud. Freud felt totally boxed in by the science of his day, so he dared to create what he called a speculative psychology, basically a map of the unseen mind. So, how did this one disagreement spiral into a full-on crisis in medicine, and how is modern science finally healing that rift? We're going to follow this story from their initial split, through the identity crisis it caused for an entire field, to the incredible neuroscience that's building the bridge, and, of course, what it all means for the future of mental health. Okay, let's travel back in time. We're in Vienna, late 1800s. Meynert is the established authority, the powerful department chair. Freud is his brilliant protege, the absolute rising star. But under the surface, this philosophical crack is forming, and it's about to split the entire field of psychiatry right down the middle. So, in our imagined conversation, Freud is defending himself. He's basically saying, look, I didn't abandon the brain by choice. Without modern tools like fMRI or EEG, he had no way to see what was going on inside a living brain. So, to help his patients who were suffering right now, he had to build these theoretical models of the mind. It was the only tool he had.
But Meinert's response is sharp. For him, a lack of tools was no excuse to just wander off the path of empirical science. He saw Freud's theories as a really dangerous step into pure speculation. Ideas that were fascinating, for sure, but that you couldn't actually prove or disprove.
And you have to understand, this was not just some intellectual squabble. This split between the brain camp and the mind camp had massive real-world consequences. It pushed psychiatry into a full-blown identity crisis that lasted for most of the 20th century. By the 1970s, this crisis just exploded. First, you have the shocking Rosenhan study, where healthy researchers went into psychiatric hospitals and every single one of them was admitted as mentally ill. Then, a huge US-UK study revealed that American psychiatrists who were really steeped in Freud's theories were diagnosing patients completely differently than their European colleagues. The field's credibility was just hanging by a thread. The solution they came up with was the DSM-3, and it was, for all intents and purposes, a ceasefire in the brain versus mind war. It created a common language by focusing only on observable symptoms. So if you have symptoms X, Y, and Z, you get a diagnosis of depression. This made diagnosis way more reliable, but it came at a huge cost. It completely ignored the root cause, the why. And this left psychiatry in a really strange position for decades. It had this reliable diagnostic book, but it was just descriptive, not explanatory. It could label the what, but offered zero insight into the why. And that vast chasm between Meinert's brain and Freud's mind, it was just left there, completely untouched. But now everything is changing. The very technology that Freud said was missing has finally arrived. Modern neuroscience is starting to build a bridge across that old, deep chasm. And in this fascinating twist of history, it's starting to prove that both Meynert and Freud were actually right, each in their own way. Okay, to see this bridge in action, let's just take one of the most famous psychological concepts of all time, the ego. We all associate it with Freud, right? But its story is so much more complex, and it reveals everything about this incredible scientific reconciliation. All right, here's something that might blow your mind. The concept of the ego. It didn't actually start with Freud. It was Meinert's idea first. He saw the ego as a physical thing, a self-organizing network of neurons inside the brain. Freud later took that biological idea and transformed it into the purely psychological concept we all know today, our sense of self shaped by our life. So for over 100 years, these two definitions seemed completely incompatible. One was biological hardware, the other was psychological software. They were in two totally different worlds. But then, neuroscience found the physical structure that seemed to be doing exactly what both men were describing. And the big breakthrough was the discovery of the default mode network, or the DMN.
This is a real measurable network in our brain that gets super active when we're just thinking about ourselves, remembering our past, or planning our future. It is, in essence, the biological home of our inner self. It's Meynert's physical network and Freud's psychological ego finally seen as the exact same thing. This is a powerful, powerful idea. It does more than just solve some historical debate. It lets us completely reimagine what mental disorders even are. We can move beyond these simple checklists of symptoms and toward an understanding of what's actually happening at the level of our brain networks. Just look at the shift in thinking. A personality disorder is no longer just a pattern of behavior. Now we can see it as a disturbance of that default mode network we just talked about. Schizophrenia isn't just about hallucinations. It's a problem with how different brain networks are connected. And depression isn't just a low mood. It can be understood as a disturbance in the brain's ability to adapt and change, what scientists call its plasticity. This gives us a much deeper, more precise vocabulary. Psychosis can be seen as a weakening of connections, which helps explain that feeling of fragmented thoughts. Mood isn't some mysterious feeling. It's an emergent property of the brain's flexibility. And anxiety can be understood as a real physical destabilization signal that is literally rippling through the brain's networks. So where does this all lead? Well, if you can redefine the problems, it means you can redefine the entire field. It points toward a future with a new kind of doctor practicing a whole new kind of psychiatry. The ultimate vision here is to move beyond the term psychiatry, with all of its historical baggage from the brain versus mind wars. The future, the argument goes, is in neuroanalysis, a name that reflects a direct scientific analysis of the brain itself. And this brings us right back full circle to what Meynert was arguing for all along. In his imagined final words, he describes this future practitioner, a neuroanalyst who masters not just neuroscience, but also complex systems physics and signal processing. I mean, they're essentially treating the brain like the incredibly complex biological computer that it is. This new approach could totally revolutionize treatment. First, you'd map a patient's specific brain arrhythmias, their unique network problems. Then, you'd use tools for brain pacing to correct those faulty signals, almost like a pacemaker corrects a heart's rhythm. And third, you'd use therapies to boost the brain's natural ability to change and heal itself. So by finally building that bridge between the brain and the mind, modern science has reconciled a conflict that's over a century old. It has brought the visions of both Meynert and Freud into a single, unified focus. And that leaves us with one provocative question for the future. After 100 years of division, is the field of psychiatry finally ready for its next great leap?